Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask an Expert featuring Ride IQ coach Meaghan Marinovich Burdick today. I could not be happier to have this guest with us. Kinsey and I actually went back and forth about this is Jessa speaking for anyone who's just listening, but Kinsey and I went back and forth about who gets to be the host today because we both love Meaghan so dearly. And we've shared this before, but you may not have heard. Meaghan and Kinsey and I all grew up together in Minnesota. We go way, way, way back. I'll try to find some photos of us on ponies together. And Meaghan's sister, Charlie, who is also incredible, and we love her dearly too. But that is kind of a segue into what our topic is today. We grew up in Minnesota. Meaghan now lives in Iowa. And 'tis the season to be talking about winter riding and all the periphery topics around that. So winter motivation, winter riding wear, all of the kind of challenges of riding, especially if it's super cold out. We will also talk about off-season riding for those of you who are in Florida or other places that are still warm. And I hope nobody is cursing you right now because they are in the cold and the dark. We love you no matter where you are. But a lot of our conversation with Meaghan will be around cold weather riding, which Meaghan, you are very familiar with.
Very familiar. Thanks to Minnesota.
I know, Minnesota, and you stayed close. You're in Powder River Ranch is in central Iowa. Is that right?
Yeah, we're just outside of Des Moines.
Okay. And tell us what the weather has been like lately, and tell us the horses that you are riding through this season. Do you have your upper level horse? Are you riding a handful of horses throughout the winter? What's your riding program going to look like from now until show season starts?
Yeah, so it's been actually really nice here. I still have a few jumps in the outdoor, which is shocking that never really happens in the Midwest, especially this time of the year. Today, however, it was absolutely freezing, and I chose today to go out hacking of all the days. So we're still very lucky. We've had 1 or 2 days of snow, but it's kind of quickly melted. The horses I have right now, I have a young off-the-track thoroughbred that used to be a polo horse that's just sort of restarting into her eventing career. And I have a 4-year-old Brazilian sport horse that came over last year from Brazil. And my Palomino Lenny, who was injured last winter, is back and getting ready for his comeback after his injury. And poor Riviera, or I should say Lucky Riviera, she got to stay in Aiken because unfortunately she was injured at Mid-South. So she's the lucky one, I guess, to stay in the warm. Unfortunately, though, she is injured.
Seriously, she timed that out well.
It's like she did it on purpose. She didn't want to come back to the snow.
I didn't know you had those youngsters with you. You'll have to share a picture of the thoroughbred and the horse that you have, the young one from Brazil. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, it's fun. It keeps things very interesting this time of the year.
And I know Lenny too, I didn't want to neglect him in that question, but I've seen photos of him and he is, a dream horse. Hopefully I can get photos of all 3 of those horses from you to share with people because I know Lenny is lovely and I'm sure the other 2 are lovely. But it's actually really nice that you have that mix of horses that you can kind of relate to some of these questions, because I know a lot of people are coming from a position of a youngster who is acting up in the cold weather or super hot. So I knew that you would be able to relate whether you had youngsters right now or not, but that will be nice. Let's start by chatting about how you approach winter kind of from a high level view. Is winter usually a time that you use to give horses extended breaks and then build back up prior to show season? Or do you plan to have these horses in consistent work throughout the cold weather and just adjust what that work looks like?
So it kind of depends on the horse's competition schedule at the end of the year. In this country we can compete 12 months out of the year, which I think is kind of hard and not really fair, because it kind of forces us to want to keep going and never give a break. but I try to give them anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks completely off. I used to do it right before Thanksgiving through the new year and then start them back in January. Um, Now I just kind of adjusted according to my personal travel, because that's normally when I like to travel that time of the year, or if they finish early in the season or later in the season when they get that break. Um, but a lot of my clients keep their horses at home and don't have indoors, so I've gotten used to adjusting it, honestly, according to the weather. So this year, a lot of people are still riding and planning on giving time off, January, February, and then starting back. We kind of just are using the warm weather when we can.
Totally. So like take advantage of it. If
Yeah.
you have the opportunity to be
Yeah.
riding while you can.
Yeah.
That actually kind of touches on a question from Grace. She said, this is the first year that I'll only have an enclosed grass field to ride in. Do you have any tips for exercises to work on when the ground inevitably freezes? And that's kind of her riding
Her
area.
place to ride. Yeah. So a lot of my clients, that's all they have as well. As long as the actual like grass cover is pretty good and it's not like been a pasture that's been eaten down, you can actually ride on it most of the winter because the grass actually acts a little bit like sand, is how I have kind of felt even going and teaching at some of my clients' houses. Um, you might not do a super tight circle when it's frozen. You might ride like a 30 or 40-meter circle instead of a 10 or 15-meter circle. Um, but as long as like you're comfortable enough and you're not freezing, I think it's fine to ride on. I probably wouldn't jump a lot on it just because it is a little bit harder, but you can do almost all your flat work. And it honestly, soft or hard ground is better than, deep ground to keeping the horses sound and in terms of like soft tissue injuries.
Yeah. If the snow does get deep and you're in a field like that, what do you do? I mean, in that case, it kind of sounds like the footing is not going to be good until some of it melts off. Is that
Well,
right?
see, now I think that's the most fun to ride in.
It
Might
is
just
the most fun. Yeah.
you might just maybe not do a full 30 minutes, but riding in deep snow is the most fun. It's the coolest feeling. You might do more walking, but honestly, trotting and cantering in deep snow just for a little bit, it is so much fun. And I like to make shapes in the snow, and I that is the most fun. I would 100% when it snows, put your saddle on and go ride.
It's so funny. I live in Colorado, and the way you talk about that is like a powder day for skiers. Like
Exactly.
you're like so stoked about it. And it
Yeah.
is interesting to think about, like you can see your geometry and kind of like look back on what your ride was and whether your circles were as round as you thought your
Yeah.
circles were or whatnot. That I'm picturing right now, I can't help but picture Olaf, which is one of the horses in the private group, and he's a fjord and he's in Minnesota and was just like built for that. And Anna shares pictures of them in the snow sometimes, and it's just very storybook, which is kind of, I mean, when I think about it, that is just makes me
That's
happy
like
to
what
think
it's
about all that.
supposed to be, and it's just beautiful.
Totally. Erin is in Colorado and she asked, how can you tell when the footing is safe or not outside?
Um, that's tough, and it's a touchy subject for me because Lenny actually fell on the ice and he broke his pelvis last January. So I'm very cautious about ice. So if there's any ice, or especially like after snow and it's melted and then it's gotten cold that night, I probably would avoid it. Anywhere where you have to be on ice. Riding out on the grass is actually, it'd be a little bit better. You can get a little bit of traction. Um, Frozen fields, our fields unfortunately have been tilled um, early this year, so when it freezes, they're kind of hard to ride on. Um, but you kind of have to use your best judgment and honestly go out and check it if you're at all worried. And I'm kind of paranoid about it now, so I roads are hard, like gravel roads that ice has or snow is melted and then iced over is the most dangerous. Um,
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that about Lenny either. That's horrible and really scary.
Yeah, it was not fun. But hopefully he'll be back this next year.
He'll be back.
Yeah.
Um,
And
okay.
it wasn't riding, so he was just hand walking and fell.
I was curious about that, but I didn't want to ask just
Yeah.
because it would be very, I mean, either way, it's pretty traumatic, but I'm
Yeah.
glad you weren't on him.
Yeah.
On that note, I'm curious about studs and Anna, Olaf's owner, who I think is here because we have a comment. It's so annoying. This platform doesn't tell me who's commenting, but it says Olaf is the best pony to ride through the snow. He charges through any snow drift, and you just have to hang on and giggle. One of the questions that Anna asked ahead of time, she said that she just pulled shoes for the season and she's grateful that her horses have good feet and do well with the transition. But she's curious how you handle winter shoeing decisions. Do you do anything different? Do you keep everyone the same? Do you add boreum studs, etc.?
So I have never done boreum or like the little studs, like some of the old polo horses that we had, like had little, it probably is what boreum is, like little tiny studs coming out. I rather they're barefoot if they can handle it. It's so much safer. So I would say 80% of the horses in our barn this time of the year have already had their hind shoes pulled off just in case, we do get some snowy days. Uh, all of the young horses that I have, they're all barefoot. So luckily for them, I don't have to worry about it, and I feel like they can handle the ice, walking on ice a lot easier than shoes. Um, the horses that have shoes, they get snow pads put in front, and barefoot behind, and then we just kind of manage them as needed. Our pastures are far away from our barn, and it's a long walk on a gravel road and a paved driveway to get there. So in the winter when it gets bad, they don't get much turnout. Unfortunately, they go in sand paddocks down by the barn, and they're out either at night or during the day, but it's just not a huge space.
Is that limited turnout like versus going to the pasture to avoid
Oh,
the icy walk?
the walk, yeah,
If
especially after Lenny.
Yeah, totally. If it weren't for that walk, like I'm picturing like Jackery Oaks where you and I used to ride, where the paddocks
Yeah.
are or the pastures are right off of where the stalls are, would
Yep.
you change turnout at all compared to the summer months?
No. Unless like well, it's pretty nice that now I have a story about Lenny. Except for something that has happened, like Lenny, I'm afraid to put him out kind of whenever he could slip and fall on ice. So like a horse like that I know has an issue, I would change their turnout, and I let them loose in the indoor a couple days a week, and then they just go to the sand paddock during the day for a couple hours.
That's smart. When you let them loose in the indoor, are you like kind of coaxing them and trying to help them get some of that energy out?
Normally, I don't have to.
Okay.
Like, and if they're good with friends, like I'll put two in there at a time. I have mirrors, so I get really nervous that they're gonna like buck and kick out at my mirrors. So if I do stand by the mirrors to make sure that they aren't too silly,
Totally.
or I fence them off with jumps.
A human shield for
Exactly.
protecting the mirrors.
With a lunge whipping, get away from my
Yeah,
mirrors.
good. Um, okay, that's a good reminder. And I know some people are at boarding barns where it's harder to find time that you might have the indoor alone, but yeah, that's a great spot to kind of let them get some of that energy out.
Yeah.
Speaking of energy, Catherine said, do you have any suggestions for not dying on a young, fresh, off the track thoroughbred on cold and windy days? I'm sure you do.
Yes, that was this morning. I nearly died, but I got off of her and went and lunged her inside. I The hardest thing in the winter months is even if they are on their normal turnout in a big pasture, I feel like they just don't move around as much as they do in the summer months, especially our horses who have a round bale now. Like they're at the round bale and then they walk to the water and then they walk back to the round bale. They're just not, running and playing. So all of them, even the older ones, have a lot more energy. So I do find that I do free lunge them in the indoor if they're what I kind of call the insane moment and just need they just need to be a horse and buck and squeal. And if you're not allowed to do that, I know some places are kind of weird about that, but otherwise I just lunge them in a halter and let them play. And then I try to cool them down a little bit and then go to work. So today on the young mare that I had, I let her mess around and buck and kick and kind of be crazy. And then I put the surcingle back on her and lunged her in side reins and tried to get a productive training session. And sometimes you just have to, like, I don't want to say give up. Give up's not the right word, but you have to adjust what your plan is going to be if all of a sudden they have a few too many screws loose.
Totally. That is really in line with the question that Christina asked, which is, what is the line for acceptable shenanigans from a young horse that feels good and fresh and thinks that the weather is delightful, versus like she's wanting to not kind of accept bad habits that might be coming out on days like that.
Yeah.
How do you kind of like distinguish between adjusting your plan, letting them have fun within reason, etc.?
I think if you've had your horse for a number of years and you kind of know what you're going to get during the nicer months, I don't want to say you just let it all go in the winter, because that's probably not the best answer. But my old working student, she had this thoroughbred, and he was big and he's lovely type of horse, but in the winter, his canter in the indoor, he'd just start leaping and just kept leaping in the canter. It was like he was like hopping like this all the way around the indoor. And we spent, I don't know, 3 months of the winter trying to train it out of him, and then we go outside and he doesn't do it anymore. So I think knowing stuff like that it'll pass, is fine. The babies, I just let them play. If they get kind of dangerous, I'll lunge them just so I don't fall off. And mainly now that's because I have a child and I don't want to get hurt. Where when I was younger, I just hold on to the neck strap and let them buck and leap, and because they're really just having fun. I think you can tell the difference when you're on them with their ears. They're either kind of like pinning their ears at you if they're angry and not wanting to be trained, or they're like happy and leaping because it's just a fun time and the weather's beautiful. Or freezing cold. It's kind of depending
Totally.
how you look at it.
I love your optimism. It is beautiful. And I think at some point, depending on where you are in the country, it can become like there can be a bit of a slump. Like I think a lot of people who live in places that have a winter season like really appreciate the beauty and the changing seasons. But there can be a slump come January or February when things have been cold for a long time and they're getting darker, seemingly. Or they've just been dark for a long time. A couple of people asked about finding motivation in those moments, and I'm not sure if there's an answer to this, but is there anything that you do to kind of get yourself through that hard part when you still have a ways to go and it's not, spring doesn't feel like it's quite just around the corner yet, and you've been maybe in an indoor for a long time or in an outdoor field for a long time?
I always tell myself that there's no pressure to ride during those times. If it's cold, it's dark, you've had a terrible day at work, whatever the reason may be, like, you don't have to ride. And I think maybe social media has made it so that we feel like we need to ride because someone's doing something in some other part of the world or other part of the country. So you're kind of feeling like a little bit behind. But I tell myself and I tell my clients, like, hey, if we look at the grand scheme of things, really, I mean, in Iowa, it's probably, depending on the year, it's anywhere from 8 to 14 weeks that is, really bad. And then you talk about July where it's 100 degrees. Like, I feel like that's worse. But I think there's no pressure to ride. If it's a nice sunny day, just get on and go for a walk down the road. Because I feel like sunlight, especially for me, sunlight is a huge motivating factor. So riding in the dark is just so depressing. And then yeah, but don't put pressure on yourself. That's my advice. And it's totally okay to give the horse 2 months off.
I think that is such, I mean, I hope that some people just did a sigh of relief and like will carry that with them and give themselves permission because you deserve it. And
Yeah.
honestly, your horse deserves it too. But I love the advice about the sunshine too, because that really is like vitamin D is no joke
Yeah.
and can help so much. Um, let's dig into what people might be feeling guilty about when they're not riding. Like maybe they're thinking their horse is going to lose training or lose condition. When they start going down that road, like what is your thought process? Are you thinking about when the horse's show season starts and kind of like there's a specific date that you might start ramping up that conditioning, and if you do that, you're going to be all set? Or how do you approach those types of thoughts about not wanting to be regressing or setting or doing anything that would be detrimental to your goals for the upcoming season?
Yeah. So I think first off, I firmly believe this. There's no such thing as regressing when you're giving your horse time off. I think, and I know personally some of my clients feel that if their horse has a month off, like they're gonna lose everything. Um, they're too intelligent, like they don't lose training. They know it. It just might take an extra week to get back. So I don't want anybody to think that they're regressing just by giving time off. In terms of, I kind of have to look at it like case by case. The more experienced horses, and more experienced, I don't mean like a beginner novice horse versus an advanced horse. I mean a horse that knows its job, has been out, done its thing with its owner at any level. Those horses, I feel like you can kind of put them aside, let them be a horse, and you can kind of pick them right back up. Now, some, might be really spunky and excited the first week or two back into work, but you're not so worried about having to train them. It's more like the babies. If you put yourself on a goal of saying, I'm going to do a horse show May 1st with a coming 5-year-old that has never done a horse show, then you kind of start thinking backwards. And it's not so much, for me, it's not so much the fitness, because the level that they're going to be doing for their first show doesn't require a huge amount of fitness. But it's more, do I have enough time to fit in all the training things, and when do I need to start doing that? And if May 1st is a horse show, I would be totally fine at not even touching the horse until the end of February. And that's me personally. Some people might feel that they need to, you could be doing groundwork or, other things with them that might not involve riding for the babies. But yeah, I would say most, at least my clients, I think they set more their year-end goals. So it wouldn't be that they think about the first show. We like to set like the end goal of the year and then work backwards from that versus the first show, because so much can happen between now and May, really. Um, anything with horses.
Yeah. Between now and tomorrow.
Yeah.
That May date relates to a question that Caitlin asked. And Caitlin she lives in Minnesota. She shares videos and photos from Otter Creek all the time. And I have so much nostalgia, and she has the most beautiful mare. So Caitlin, keep the photos and videos coming, please. But she asked, how can I come out swinging for the first show, which it sounds like for her, it's usually a schooling show at Otter Creek in May. But she says that like sometimes she doesn't even know if she's going to be able to like ride outside before that first schooling show comes up. Do you have any advice for like putting your best foot forward, even if you're not going to have, much time outside of an indoor before your first schooling show or show?
Growing up in Minnesota and going to Pony Cup where it's snowing when you're doing Pony Cup, I totally, totally can relate to those days. I would almost treat it as your first show, because sometimes there is snow on the ground when the entries open for Otter Creek. Like that, it's a kind of a known fact, and sometimes they do get a late April snow. I think that was last year. So it's kind of intimidating, thinking like I'm gonna go and jump a cross country jump and they haven't seen one in 6 or 7 months. Um, I would kind of treat the horse show as kind of your schooling, and you're going to have to, you know, be a little bit more on your toes and probably ride a little bit harder at some of the cross country jumps just because you're not sure what's going to happen. I feel like a lot of the times the first few jumps, like they jump so high over the cross country jumps their first time out, like you need to hang on tight or like get a parachute or something to make sure that you land back in the saddle. Um, in terms of getting ready for the show, throw anything that you possibly can in your indoor. Like you can make a ditch out of a tarp. I just say be aware for horses that have shoes. The poor Rock Phantom horse that I used to have, I did that, and the horse stepped on the tarp, and then the tarp got stuck into his shoe, and then I fell off, and he ran around the indoor dragging a tarp. So just be, a little bit aware of if you're doing that with horses who have shoes. But you can make a lot of scary stuff in an indoor to get prepped for just come out and go cross country.
That sounds like the most chaotic scene I have ever imagined. Yeah, there's no chance any rider is staying on if there's a tarp stuck in their shoe. If somebody is going out for their first dressage schooling show, I would imagine that the advice is the same. Just like treat it like schooling if your horse hasn't been outside or ridden outside for a long period of time.
Yeah, and I think most of the shows, even schooling shows, I feel like you can go there the day before. So if you can, maybe go there the day before and maybe lunge the horse if they're a little bit fresh, when you get there, or if they're not, go for a couple rides or a pre-ride in the morning just to have an understanding of how they might feel if it might be a little bit stronger than they ended at the last season.
Yeah. It sounds like an exciting time for everybody, horses and riders and judges and officials alike. When we're talking about taking, I'm kind of going back here because there were two questions that I wanted to take off of our discussion about giving your horse time off. That was one. And then the second one is when your horse is back in work after an extended period of time off. I know they might be fresh and you might be kind of like giving them that week or two to settle back into their work. But what does that actually look like? Like, are those initial rides, assuming a decent amount of fitness has been lost and there's like, walk and trot sets being done? Or what do you recommend to your students who have given their horse 6 weeks off as far as like what that first or second week looks like?
Yeah. So I'm kind of spoiled right now because I have a few different viewpoints on it because I have 3 horses right now. One's coming back in from 3 months off, one's coming back in from 7 weeks off, and one is coming in from a month off. And they're all different levels and they're all different types. So I have a dressage horse that had 3 months off because the owner and I were focusing on our other horse and going to AECs. And the thing came in so fat and overweight, but she was an explosive like nightmare. I took her out into the field and I thought, okay, she's had 3 months off. I'm probably going to walk her for, a week or two up and down the hills. And she took off galloping. I had just done the land safe clinic and I literally thought in my head, okay, do I practice my emergency dismount or do I run her up this steep hill because hopefully she's so fat and out of shape that the hill will slow her down. I went for the hill and it worked wonders. So that plan of like, let's walk and take it really slow and nice, completely went out the window. And for the next, she's back in now for about 4 weeks now. She's now working outside, doing her flat work. But like, I totally had to change my original plan of walking and taking it slow, just because her brain was not on the same page. The horse that had 7 weeks off is a 12-year-old event horse, knows his job. And I'm just walking him. He started last week and we're just going on hacks and I can hack him on a buckle and it's lovely. And I don't even have to worry about it. The other one is my coming 5-year-old baby who he hacks out beautifully and I could hack him on a buckle. But the second I pick up the reins in the indoor, he's like a fire-breathing dragon. So I try to do stuff slow in the indoor just to try to train his brain a little bit. So they're all different, depending on how they respond. I would love to just get on and walk them for a week or two up and down hills, but sometimes the weather or their brain is not on board. But if they've been turned out on hills, they've kind of been doing that themselves for their time off.
Okay, so if they have an even enough temperament, you can ease them into it. And
Yeah.
then after that, like at the end of that second week, you might be doing what feels like a light, full flat work ride.
Yeah, the overweight mare, I mean, I would flat her for 15 minutes and she'd be huffing and puffing. And when I say flat her, like I'm doing walk, trot, canter, and she's getting a little bit of breather here and there, but that's what she could physically handle. And that's what we did. And then she was done.
Okay, so adjust according to horse's temperament and adjust according to what your horse is telling you in terms of
Yeah.
what they can handle.
Yep.
All right. I am curious what a typical week looks like during the winter. No matter what, most people are somewhat confined. Being able to hack out is like definitely a gift and hopefully something people can take advantage of. But I'm curious how you keep things interesting, both for you and the horse. Like, do you have a typical schedule of like one hack a week, one day with rails a week, a jump day, or groundwork, or anything that you're like sprinkling in to keep it interesting for you and the horses? Or does it look pretty similar in terms of like what the rest of the year would look like?
Um, I kind of go off the seat of my pants, which is probably maybe not the best. I would say so. Since having Ava, I try not to work or ride on the weekends. So for most people, let's just call that Monday, Tuesday for people who have normal office jobs, since they will probably most likely ride on the weekends. So I have, 5 days a week that I'm in the barn riding, and I'm not, or teaching. And I'm not saying that those 5 days that every horse is doing that. But it kind of goes, we do like different things at different times of the year. So we'll have like a free jump kind of day, but the free jump day at the barn will maybe last a week that I'll leave it up. But some of my clients will trailer in and free jump their horses. I've put cross country jumps in the indoor, so I'll leave those up for, 5 to 10 days. Grid work and then kind of course work and pole work and all those things. But I'll work around it. So I would say on average, I'm flatting or doing a pole work session, once or twice a week, maybe jumping once a week. The babies, I find it's better if I jump them like 3 or 4 days in a row, and then maybe they have a couple days off. So I'll do that a lot in the winter. Kind of jump, and it's not jumping big, but they jump 3 or 4 days and then they have 3 or 4 days off. But I just kind of mix it up, and it's really bad. Like I used to try to have a plan, but then I'd get frustrated when my plan wasn't working while I was riding. So I have an idea of what I'm going to do. And that idea is I'm either going to put the jump saddle on or the dressage saddle on. And 90% of the time it's the jump saddle because I can flat in the jump saddle or go over a jump, which people are probably like, that's not helpful information. But
I think it's really helpful information and it does make complete sense. Like, kind of go with what you're working with under you and how you feel. Like, part of this is keeping you, the rider, interested too. And that's like, I think that works well for a lot of people. And some people prefer to have a plan, but kind of the um the overarching theme is like, do what you can to keep it interesting so it's still fun for you and your horse.
right. Yeah.
Whether you
'Cause
have
we'll
a
do
plan
this for
for it
fun.
or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also am really interested to hear that the young ones jump like 3, 4 days in a row. Is that because they are learning? So from one day to the next, they can kind of take that learning, or what's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I found that they like it's almost like they retain the information better. Like you can you teach them, let's just say like one thing, like you work on a bounce or a grid and you do it 3 or 4 days in a row. And at the fourth day, you're like, wow, they've really figured this out. Where sometimes where if you do it only once or twice a week, it's taken a month for them to get that same amount of information that they have now gotten within a week. So I feel like not that they can even like progress quicker, but they're just learning more skills, maybe a little bit faster. I don't know. My old boss in England, that's what she did. So, and it seemed to work.
Yeah, that's really smart. And I hadn't heard of that approach, but it does make a lot of sense. Kim, I believe, let me check. Yep, Kim asked a question about warming up when it's really cold out. And I guess we could assume she's in an indoor or not. I'm not sure if it matters, but she said, how about the conundrum that you should have a nice long walking warm up, but if you and your horse walk that long when it's really cold, you'll both freeze to death. Trotting is so much warmer.
Okay, I think so many people are probably going to get frustrated at what I'm about to say, but it is backed up by my vet. Horses are flight animals. They are designed to be eating grass and then all of a sudden start running. Get on and freaking warm up, trot, canter, because you're riding to have fun. You're doing it for enjoyment, either energy, happiness, whatever. Yeah, just get on and trot and canter and get warm. Walk afterwards.
Okay. Walk after, like as your cool down, or walk after you're warm and before you're doing your skill work, or both? Probably both. Okay.
Sure, both.
So you can get warm, Kim. You have permission.
Get warm. Get on and canter.
So another thing that I always found challenging in the winter was whether the horse was clipped or not. The situation with the sweating and the cold was hard to know if I was doing the right thing. How do you approach clipping? How do you approach coolers? Like, are you riding in any sort of cooler? Are you cooling out in a cooler? Are you clipping? What amount of sweating is too much if you're going to be walking in the freezing cold after your ride, assuming you're in an indoor? Like, will you just address some of that concern that is really natural and probably to some extent warranted?
Yep. So I kind of have all of that because I do have clients that keep their horses at home and then trailer in. So my horses, none of them are clipped right now, and that's mainly because I'm lazy and I hate clipping horses. So that is my plan after Christmas, is to clip. The ones that are clipped, I do like a hunter clip. That's what we called it in England. It's basically like from their belly, like kind of the belly side, back rib, kind of by the stifle, and it's just a diagonal up towards their ears. And I take everything off underneath it just so that their back can stay warmer. I found that that's, for me, is the easiest clip for the winter. They don't sweat as much. I can get them drier faster before they have to go back outside. My situation at the barn is we do have heat in the indoor, but I don't really turn it on. So it stays about anywhere from 28 to 40, kind of just depending on the weather. But the barn is heated to 50, so I don't have to worry about them getting cold. But when people trailer in for lessons and their horses aren't clipped and they're not used to it, they get very sweaty. So they walk around in a cooler, or I have one that she'll give her horse a bath afterwards and put a cooler on it and then use like a hair dryer and dry the hair before she puts it back in the trailer to go home. So that's an option. One of my best friends who is a surgeon, like a lot of people, I mean, we go fox hunting and they get hot and sweaty, and as long as they're still moving, they shouldn't really get too cold if they're outside. So I would say keep moving. I don't ride in any sort of blankets or like the half cooler things, mainly because I don't take the hair off their back. If they had a full body clip on and I was outside and it was a cold day and I was planning on mainly walking and not really working, then I might put, what are they called? Quarter sheets on. Yeah, it's a pain. It's a process, especially
Yeah,
when they're not clipped.
totally.
Hair dryers are great. Hair dryers, they dry really fast with a hair dryer.
Really? Who would have thought? It sounds like, I mean, it takes me forever to dry my own hair, but I guess they have kind of, shorter,
Or
whatever.
like Rambo came out with this blanket that's this little liner thing that you can put on the horse that's still a little sweaty and then put their blankets on them. So those actually work pretty well. We have a few of those in the barn.
And what is the liner meant to do?
It's like meshy and holds a little bit of air, so it keeps the blanket off them a little bit.
Helps them like
So it can get
still
airflow.
dry off.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing you said was a reminder to me that Gina Smith told us last year, and Gina is one of our Ride IQ coaches as well. She's a Grand Prix, actually, she's an Olympic dressage rider living in Canada. So she can relate as well.
Yeah.
And I remember one thing she said was like, it really pains her when people, especially if they're in like a group lesson, they just stop in the winter.
Yeah.
Like their horse is standing still and you can see all the steam coming off of it. So she said what you said, which is like, just keep moving. Whether it's cooling down or not cooling down. Last question on this topic. When you've put a cooler on your horse and you're continuing to walk and you're going to untack, and let's say like the horse is not completely dry yet, which would be expected.
Yep.
Would you keep that cooler, or like the Rambo blanket that you mentioned would be an option, but like they should be blanketed until they're completely dry? Is that right? No one can see
what environment are they in? In my barn, no. I rarely.
Right. Okay. If they were in the cold.
If they were out in the cold, the problem I see a little bit is if the cooler is really damp, you almost need a second cooler if they're a really damp horse. So you might need to have two, but it's if you put a cooler on and you're walking around and you get to the barn, and let's say the barn's not heated but you're out of the wind, I think you can curry them and brush them and then maybe put a different cooler back on them and stick them in a stall. I used to do that a lot at the, remember Centerline?
Yeah.
Barn? Yeah. So there you'd have to do that a lot because none of it was heated, but at least it was out of the wind. I think if you're in the wind and they're wet and they're not moving, you need to keep some sort of blanket on them. And that might be that you put a cooler on and then throw a blanket on top.
Yeah. That's a great tip. And we got a tip in chat too. Somebody said dog grooming dryers are great and can be found for less than $100 on popular pet supply websites.
There you go.
I mentioned nostalgia earlier about Otter Creek, but the talk about coolers is giving me nostalgia too, because
when we used to make them,
Megan and Kinsey and I and Megan's sister Charlie used to go to Joann Fabrics and buy so much fleece and make these like tie coolers. If anybody else has done this, please send a note.
You can join our club.
Group. Yeah. It was so fun. And very cute. Like the coolers were cute. Maybe we'll start a business doing that.
And then riding the horses double bareback.
Yeah. Growing up as a young person riding is really fun. A lot of nostalgia today.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about, I have all these questions that we got so many questions ahead of time that I'm literally scrolling through pages. I'm going to do a Control F to find what I'm looking for. Okay. How should a horse's diet and hydration be adjusted during colder months to maintain their health? Are you adjusting their feed, or are you putting anything in their water, anything like that when it's super cold out?
I find that they don't drink as much, or at least mine don't, but they can have as much hay as they possibly want when they're outside to stay warm. I adjust their grain more on like how they're looking. Mine don't really get a ton of grain. They get as much hay as they want though.
Well, I'm sure that you didn't hear our last 2 Ask an Experts ago was with Dr. Lisa Casanella, and she said exactly what you just said was recommended. Just like more and more hay and, minimum grain if you can.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. We have reassurance from the vet and the rider. Caitlin, who I mentioned before, she's in Minnesota. She asked if you have any favorite exercises that you can lend us for the flat or over poles or small jumps in an indoor. And I'm sure you have like a ton that you pull from, but are there any that you can mention that people
I'll
might be
send
able
her
to?
my book.
Yeah. Do you have a book?
I mean, it's not a book. It's just like what I write down and
Yeah,
put in a 3-ring binder. So I guess I have a book, but
that's cool.
yeah.
Let's talk
Um,
about like, yeah, anything that comes to mind, maybe like one in each of those categories, like a flat exercise you might use as a go-to, an over poles exercise. And I mean, maybe jumps is just a grid or something you set up. If anything
no,
specific
it's
comes to
not.
mind.
Circle torture.
Oh,
Because you can even have an indoor that's the size of a 20-meter circle, and you can still do circle torture on that 20-meter circle. So
describe it.
that I think there's a Ride IQ episode on it.
Yeah, I think so too.
So it's 4 jumps on a 20-meter circle, um, like 2 feet high, maybe. And you could do that all winter long, and you just slowly add in the 4 jumps and center to center or outside to outside, inside, inside, inside to outside, practicing a little bit of leg yield in between. I mean, it's hell. That's why it's circle torture it's hard. Um,
What's the goal of the exercise?
I adjustability and rideability of the canter. Oh, and you're not having a big fence because I think when you add too much height, um, we as the rider gets a little paranoid. So take the height out, make it 2 feet tall, and um, can you change the horse's canter? Can you keep the canter the same and over 4 jumps?
Those jumps come up fast
They do.
when you're on a 20-meter circle.
Yeah.
Is there any are there any flat work exercises that come to mind?
I don't really know what it's called, but I call them like little waves along the long side where you come off the. I'm like going to use my finger, like people are going to be able to see it. You like come out of the corner and you kind of ride like a half 10-meter circle back to the wall, and then another half 10-meter circle back to the quarter line, and you do that. It starts off more as like curves, and then like gradually throughout the winter, I'd hope that you could make a true half circle. Off and on the wall. Another one is like a little, I call it a butterfly. You canter down the long side, you ride a half 10-meter circle back, either depending on the horse's level, a flying change, a simple change through walk, simple change through trot, and then canter the other way and ride another half 10-meter circle. So it's like a half little butterfly. I like to do those. It, a way to train things differently, and you're not doing the same thing, like turn down the quarter line and leg yield or counter canter around the ring. Pole work, I mean, it's like endless things that you could do with poles. I like to randomly like just throw poles around the ring and practice trotting or cantering over them, throwing a bending line in, but not walking it, and just seeing how can you change the canter to make the distance a little better. And then 2 poles on a quarter line, seeing how many strides you can add in between, how many can you take out. Walk poles on a bend, trot poles on a bend. I mean, I love poles. That's like my winter fun.
Totally.
Yeah.
I know we have a lesson for adjustability between poles. I think it's with Leslie Law. It's with the 2 rails. So if
Rails.
anyone's interested in that. But I think we should coax you into doing a lesson on either the butterfly or the wave, because the butterfly I can totally picture, and it sounds like it would really sharpen them up and sharpen the rider up. Like that sounds challenging.
And it's cool to call it something. Like, I'm going to do a butterfly.
It's, as you were saying, I was like, that's really cute. I can picture it. Oh, Ride IQ members, maybe you can look forward to the wave or the butterfly or both.
Yeah.
Those sound like great exercises. Let's talk about equipment or riding apparel. And we have tapped you for this before because you're our resident like cold weather expert. Is there any favorite equipment? I'm not sure what would come to mind, but like that Rambo blanket mesh is a great example.
Yep.
Equipment or riding apparel that you really are grateful to have in the winter. I remember your Gobi heated vest.
Yeah.
I'll never
So
forget that because I've wanted one
hate
ever since then.
I hate the cold. Like, I hate being cold. So deciding to go fox hunting in the Midwest in the winter, you're guaranteed to freeze. So you kind of have to come up with a bunch of things. Um, Toe warmers and hand warmers if you're outside for a long time. And I learned this the hard way, that you press the toe warmers onto the bottom of your sock. You don't press it onto the boot. So it stays onto your sock. But you live in Colorado, you would know this. And you're thinking, wow, Meagan, can't believe you didn't
Colorado,
know that.
Denver does not get very cold. I'm like shocked at it. Feels like I never actually have winter coming from Minnesota. So that is a good tip though. Stick to your foot, not to your boot.
Correct. Yep. So those are kind of like go-to for me if I'm out for a long time, or if I know I'm going to be riding a lot of horses outside. I have some old Ariat insulated tall boots. So if I'm fox hunting, I always wear those. Or if I'm hacking a lot of horses outside, I'm wearing those. And I got these I call them snow pants, but they're actually, I think, meant for riding, and they're more like a snow rain pant. I got them in England. I think there used to be a store, I don't know if it's still around, called Countrywide. I think they're Shires. I'd have to look it up. But they're meant for riding, but I call them my snow pants. They're like warm and amazing, and it stops the wind because, wind just kind of runs through our breeches. So that's a go-to. The heated vest, like, game changer. If you're riding at all in the cold, invest in a heated vest. There's heated like neck koozies now, or what are they called? Gaiters.
Yeah. Neck koozie is hilarious though.
Those, like, I don't know if they still make them. They probably have better things now, but remember you used to get those helmet covers, the fleece helmet covers, and go all over your helmet?
Yeah.
I think they have little ear things that have a little band to cover your ears, because I always find it when you're out in the cold, your ears that's what gets the cold the worst. Yeah, Carhartts.
Yeah, Carhartts. Carhartts will keep you warm around the barn for sure.
Yeah, or like riding. Like I ride in snow pants if I'm going outside, or Carhartts. There's no shame.
Yeah,
you got to stay warm.
You heard it here first, everyone. Get in your Carhartts and don't feel bad about it. There definitely is no shame. Somebody in chat also said, if you like those hand warmers, please get a pair of heated socks. They're life-changing.
They have heated socks now?
I have Jody, who you know, has heated socks actually, and I think heated gloves. She runs very cold, but she has like her remote, and it really helps her in the winter. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, take a look, Meagan. Yeah. That could be great. Thank you to whoever said that. I wish I could give you credit. Yeah. Is there anything as far as the horses gear that you especially like, or is it just kind of same old?
Same old. Yeah. If it's really cold, I sometimes just ride them in their blankets, like without a saddle.
Yeah.
In the snow. That's fun. And that's like really sometimes fun. In a halter and a lead rope too. And it's really fun. You have no control.
Guys, remember to have fun. Yeah. That should really be the takeaway, I think. I mean,
like we should look at the winter as a positive way to have fun.
Yeah. It is very inspiring. It doesn't have to be serious all the time. Like one of the questions that we got was, I'm sure I won't find it now, but we did cover it, but it was from Sabrina. And she said, there's a lot of pressure from people who are motivated to ride hard all winter long. And from those of us who don't move with our whole barn to Florida to train and compete, how about what's good enough for those of us who hate the cold and dark? And it's just like, you can kind of feel that pressure of, this can suck sometimes. And I've really liked this conversation is like, A, that's okay. You don't have to like ride if it sucks. Yep. And B, like enjoy when you can enjoy, like lean into it. It doesn't have to be a training ride. It could be a hack in the sunshine. It could be riding around bareback in a halter and lead rope with a blanket or without.
The people in Florida, they don't get to ride in snow. They don't get to have that feeling.
In your snowsuit. To make people feel better, we did also get a question from Natalie, who's in Florida, and she was talking about how July and August are, pretty rough there. So
Yeah.
Everyone has, for the most part, challenging parts of the year. Okay, to kind of cap this off, are there any common mistakes that you see with people who are riding or just kind of like managing their horses in the winter that we should definitely touch on? And if nothing comes to mind, I feel like that's always a challenging question to kind of pull out of the air, but I wanted to open the door in case there are things that come to mind, whether it be a pet peeve or just kind of a common thing that you would like to see less of.
People like being mean to their horses when it's not going well, or being hard on them. And I feel like you see that more in the winter because maybe people aren't riding as much. And I don't like that.
Totally.
That's my biggest pet peeve.
I think that makes complete sense because the horses are spunky combined with the rider might be frustrated and not having as good of a time as they're having when, the sun is out for more than 6 hours a day.
As I sit in the car and it gets darker and darker.
I know.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest thing. I don't really see a lot of other things.
And we covered so many tips already too.
But
I think
be
that
kind to your horses, even if it's a bad day.
Totally. What a perfect piece of advice to end on. That we covered so many bases and people were interested. Something I should have said at the top is that just based on the amount of questions that we got in the Facebook group via DM, I even got a couple via text. I was like, this is the right topic and the right guest. Like that is the sign that this is important to people. So Meagan, we are so appreciative of you, and I will end this feeling so grateful that I got to be the one to chat with you, and I know Kinsey's going to be jealous because we love you so much, and we're so glad to have you to share your expertise. And I know that, members have shared their appreciation for you over and over, and I hope that you see that as well. Kinsey and I probably should send all of it along to you so that you hear all of it. But it really is amazing to be able to learn from you and just like stay connected.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
And thank you for doing it. For anyone not watching, Meagan is in her car because she is picking her daughter Ava, who's 13 months old, up from daycare, and that's just the way the timing worked out. So she really she really made this work for us. So
we're winging it.
Very grateful. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week and holidays and all the things, and give your love to our family for us.
Will do. And Merry
Give
Christmas.
our love to your family and your love. All right. Bye, Meagan. Thank you so much.